I am Hallie Casser-Jayne, and welcome to the Hallie Casser-Jayne Show, where along with my partner in politics, veteran White House correspondent and Time and Newsweek alum, Matthew Cooper, we slice and dice all things politics, and some days are lawmakers too. On this episode of the Hallie Casser-Jayne Show, we talk the royals, Harry and Meghan, Cuomo under fire, Joe Biden's extraordinary win, and the filibuster with former Deputy Chief of Staff to Senator Harry Reid, Adam Jenelson, the author of Kill Switch, The Rise of the Modern Senate and the Crippling of American Democracy. We begin with Hallie and Matt. Here we go. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Hallie.
How is my friend Matt?
Your friend Matt is pretty good. COVID-free.
COVID-free. You know, I get my second COVID Friday.
I know.
I'll let everybody know.
You'll be back to clubbing and, on South Beach.
Yeah, pull yourself back a little away from your mic, they're telling me. You're a little bit too hot.
Sorry.
Okay.
You'll be clubbing on South Beach.
I'll be clubbing on South Beach. I hope nobody's clubbing on South Beach, but I think they all are. But let me give you some statistics so that we put it on the books where we are this week.
Statistics.
As of this morning, there are well over 525,000 COVID-19 deaths in the United States. By the way, it equates to about 1 death per minute. Isn't that extraordinary? 1 death per minute? And more than 29 million Americans have been infected with the virus. There has been a slight downturn in daily cases reported, but that figure is ticking up again because red state governors, they can't get Biden any other way. Well, they'll just make hay out of, no masks and no open up businesses. And they're going against every CDC recommendation. But there is good news. More than 92 million doses have been administered, reaching 18.1% of the total U.S. population, according to federal data collected by the CDC. And the U.S. is currently administering over, 2.1 million shots a day. A measure of President Biden's success in terms of COVID is that Republicans are starting to try and make the case that without the T word, none of the success would have happened. But let's throw caution to the good winds. Don't underestimate the ruthless GQP. They will do whatever they can, Matt, to keep President Biden from getting the win, even if they kill more Americans. But, as we say, it's a new day. New York Times has that story on the front page. Trump deserves some credit for all of this. What's happened to our New York Times. And the final thing on all of this is Biden is announcing a new deal with Johnson & Johnson for another 100 million COVID vaccine doses. So it looks like we're doing pretty good on this COVID vaccine thing, right?
Well, I think there's definitely more supply. I think distribution's kind of screwy in a lot of places. I mean, here in D.C., very low vaccination rate. We're actually vaccinating almost as many people from out of state who work here.
Thanks.
So it's been tough getting a shot here. But yeah, generally, look, supplies are up. Supplies are getting out there. That's way up. You just get them out as fast as you can.
The thing about it is, though, when it gets to the state level, like in this state, which we'll talk about in a minute in Florida with Ron DeSantis, it's up to it should have been a federal program, if you ask me, all down the line. Remember what I said to you? We should have gotten the National Guard to go into every damn town in the country and just do it that way, door to door to door. When you have it up to the states, you're going to have, or up to, DC is not a state, but you're going to have problems. It gets into politics much more on the local level. I think that's a problem. I think that's where the mistake has been all along, but I don't know if you agree with me or not.
Could be.
There's my could be.
That's our weekly could be.
Oh, we haven't had one of those in a while, but let's move on.
It's
because
like the Daily Double on Jeopardy.
There you go. Maybe that's what we should call the show now, the Daily Double. COVID over. I'm tired of talking about it, but I'm not tired of talking about Harry and Meghan. And we really, this is foreign policy.
It's got everything. It's got everything you want in a story.
It really, really does. And so many things to say here. I have to tell you, on Facebook, I lost more followers and friends on Facebook over this than in 5 years of my ranting and raving on Trump. So that just goes to show you just how really this story has gotten into the gut of America. And I also want to say, Megyn Kelly said this, I don't know if it's true or not, I wasn't able to find out, but she said the story is divided along, in the United States, If you're pro Meghan and Harry, you're a Democrat. And if you've got some issues with it, you're a Republican. Now, in one of those rare occasions, I'm siding with the conservatives on this story. I didn't buy her. I don't buy her. I have never bought her one bit. I was, and you're going to be shocked, I thought the interview that our good friend Oprah did really was not as good an interview, which I know you thought it was. And the one question nobody asked was, why the hell did you do this? You didn't have to do this. If it was really
you mean Mary?
No. You didn't have to go public with all of this. You could have dealt with this from the inside. They talked incessantly, and certainly Harry did, about he's talked more to his grandmother in the last year or so than he had in his whole life. He had a direct line to her, and he could have spoken to her. Instead, they did this. And the answer to that is it was a PR thing more than it was anything else. I'll be quiet for a minute. Let me give you the floor.
Well, I had a different take. I thought they were pretty compelling. And, they were compelling in large part because it was so similar to the experience Diana, Princess of Wales, had with the Windsors and the staff and permanent fixtures at Buckingham Palace, known as the Firm. It was very similar, that they were putting out bad news about her, that they were controlling about everything, about the way they raised their kids and whatnot. And so what Meghan said was really not, it had the added, racial factor, but it was actually quite similar to things we've heard before. And I think that gave it considerable credibility. I mean, look, I don't know what transpired at the palace. I believe the wisdom of the American Revolution has never been more clear.
Well, that's true. Can't fight
we
that.
Had the right idea not only to shake off a king, but to bar any titles of nobility. Because when you let people live in public housing, whether it's a palace like that or, it's created a bad culture over there, I think.
The only thing that, but you see, you make the point. Well, go ahead. Finish your thought. I'm jumping in. Go ahead.
Look, ultimately, they're free to do what they want, as is the palace. They cut off the security or what have you, and he's free to go live in America and whatnot. And so, that's everybody's kind of is. In a way, it was kind of all after the fact. I mean, they've made their peace with it, and it's done.
Well, I don't know that it's done, and I think she's actually opting for more power, and that was a lot of what was behind what she did. I mean, this is a woman who said that, we don't need the titles, and, we want to get out from underneath all of that and do our own thing, yada, 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 except, by the way, I want my kid to have the title of prince. Now, the kid is a great-grandson. And no great-grandchildren other than the heir to the throne, William's kids, have the title of prince, and that's just been the way it's always been. So, I mean, she's talking out of both sides of her mouth. That kind of ticked me off to go there. She threw it out in such a way that she implicated everybody that was left, Charles, Wills, and Kate. That was ugly business. She didn't need to do that. In other words, it was ugly. It wasn't dignified. She actually wore the same makeup, by the way, that Diana had worn. She's obsessed with Diana, that Diana had worn when she gave her, revealing interview. So there's all of that. What the other part that made me crazy is Oprah's feigned horror when Meghan talked about the, somebody asking about the color of the baby's skin. Oh, please, Oprah. You knew it. You've been best friends with these people forever. No. So I didn't buy that either. And talking about protecting your son, and then you go and you expose pictures of your son and you talk about this thing and tell everybody where you're living. There were so many inconsistencies and so much crazy in all of this. I just don't think they needed to do it. It was a circus. But here's the thing. The sad part about it is they caught us all up in their drama. I don't know whether, even if you go with it was wittingly or unwittingly, Matt, they did. And you know what that says to me? Because that's pretty crazy. It's Trump. A lesson learned from Trump. Pull the drama. Play the drama. And she did a Trump. I don't say Harry because I think Harry is kind of a weak little puppy with lots of, damage, and she's having a good time with that. But, I don't know whether there's any answer to it or not. But I had been watching Good Morning Britain and the Piers stuff, and I watched, that. It's on YouTube for anybody who hasn't seen it. And I got to tell you something. He didn't deserve what he got either. Now it comes out this morning that Meghan had actually called the owners of ITV and said, I want this stopped. So she made a complaint against Piers Morgan. Whatever. I think Morgan has a job lined up, and I think this was partly staged on his part. But sorry, I know, and I'm ranting. I find the whole thing, I want us to get back to some dignity. The whole world needs to get back to dignity.
Well, Piers Morgan ran a tabloid over there. They made their bones getting leaks from Buckingham Palace. I mean, that's the kind of the side of the fence he's on. And look, the palace is going to always protect the next king, and they're going to protect William,
and father.
William and father, and they're going to, and everybody else is pretty dispensable. And that was the case with Diana. It didn't matter that Charles was an affair. They just, didn't matter what their behavior was as long as they protected them. And that's what they're going to do, which is, I guess in some institutional sense makes sense. But
I thought the Queen handled it very well. Didn't you like the response?
Yeah, the Queen's response was good. I mean, look, she's, she bounced back strongly from the Diana crisis, too. It wasn't easy, but she did. But look, I mean, did you feel this way about Diana? Do you think she was just like a big manipulator, scene stealer?
I did. I wasn't a big, I wasn't a big, I wasn't a big fan of hers either. Just wasn't. I never was. I was, maybe that I'm just a girl who has a fancy for a prince. I don't know, because it's twice that I haven't sided with the women, and to be honest with you, I'm not siding with some of these women in the Cuomo case, which we're going to talk about in a minute either. Maybe it's something inherent in me. I don't know, but no, I was never a fan of Diana's either. I've always thought she was over. But except to say, I love that she pulled herself together after it was all said and done, at least in the PR position of it, by going to Africa and working with AIDS patients and all of that. When she finally got herself, she grew up, is what she did. This one doesn't seem to have grown up yet at 30. And she's exactly the same age, by the way, as when Diana was killed in the car crash. So that's pretty bizarre, too. Yeah. The only other question that I have on this, and I'm sure we're going to get back to it because I'm sure the story's not over, but should Harry and Meghan respond to the Queen, whose husband, by the way, is dying, which was another reason I thought this was really disgusting that they did this at this particular time. It just goes to show you the kind of character that is in their gut. But it's curious as to whether Meghan and Harry will respond to the, I thought, dignified response by the Queen. We'll see.
I didn't get the sense it really required a response. I mean, it was
no, but if they want to keep the story going, yeah. But if they want to keep the story going,
will they respond? I don't know. Will they go to the funeral? Prince Philip passes soon.
Well, I'm sure she'll use the I can't because I'm pregnant. That was the other thing. She kept talking about how much she loved the Queen, and the Queen really did open up her gut to her. I remember that train ride and her sitting, or the carriage ride too. They were sitting and holding hands and, sharing a lap blanket at one point, and et cetera. So I didn't buy the Queen not being open and loving to her. Whether Charles was, that's another story. And God knows that the closeness of the kids, the two boys and the wife, before Meghan came along, speaks a great deal as to it falling apart at a very early age. But we move on. And where do we go from here? I guess we go to Governor Cuomo and the sexual harassment cases and everything else. Ay. Only point I'll make to start off is it's interesting to me that Kirsten Gillibrand and Schumer, unlike with Al Franken, those guys are keeping their mouths shut on this. But I'll let you talk.
Well, they're saying let the investigation take its course.
Well, that's something. An investigation.
That's certainly not what they afforded Al Franken. No.
Yeah, right. Do you think his standing there and taking all of this is the way to go?
From Cuomo's point of view, I think it is the way to go. I think he's betting he can just kind of ride it out. If he just says, I'm not going anywhere, then he won't have to go anywhere. He looks at Northam in Virginia, who had those racial issues, and he wrote it out. And I'm sure he looks at the polls that show that, New Yorkers aren't that outraged about this. And he figures, look, I'll just, take a lot of grief, but I'm not going to go anywhere. Now, can he run for a fourth term? I don't think that's going to happen, even though he'd been planning to. I mean, you never know, but he's up in 2022. I think it's going to be tough for him to run again. His father lost his bid for a fourth term, and I think it'd probably be the better part of valor for him not to. But we'll see. I think he's going to make it through.
Yeah. I want to talk a bit about one of the accusers who did the thing with CBS, Charlotte Bennett. And I just want to say that the press has failed to mete out this story. I just did a little background check on that woman. It took somewhat of a dig, but not much. She has a long history of being involved. She majored in sexual women's studies in college. Okay, a lot of people did. But everything she has done since then has had to do with sexual harassment. I mean, she has been really a huge voice on this in her world, from job to job to job to whatever. So
claiming sexual harassment?
No, being involved in the movement, being on boards of sexual harassment or harassment,
right.
Things, that kind of thing, being hired to do jobs. This girl is obsessed.
Yeah.
And it's weird.
Probably not the woman you want to hit on.
Well, it may be the woman you don't want to hit on, or you didn't hit on the woman, but the woman's looking to make a career for herself. She I didn't,
possible.
I didn't buy. I thought she was.
But she actually transferred jobs, right? I mean, she
because she was smart enough as she was setting something up here to do what she needed to do. Come on, Matt. If you came on to me, I'm going to tell somebody you tried to F me? I don't know. I mean, unless you really come on to me, that's just a guess or an ego or a narcissistic point of view. Direct hits. That's.
Well, she didn't say he.
Yes, she did. She said he was trying to. She said he was trying to sleep with me.
Yeah, that's what.
What does that mean?
Yeah, well, look, I mean it.
Yeah, I'm a woman. I'm telling you, what does that mean? When a man comes on to me specifically, other than that, I'm like going, he's we're playing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, all of these stories sound pretty believable to me. Yeah, they don't strike me as like.
Well, but you can say anything you want to say. I'm a woman. Remember what I said to you last week? Carry a video with you. Because it's nuts. Yeah. Who is to say, unless it's a direct hit, what any of this is?
Right. No, I agree. And I think that's part of why he's going to survive it. I think it's, Yeah.
And by the way, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, but everyone... Everyone from the guy at the Exxon station to your plumber to the governor of New York knows you're not supposed to say, how do you like sleeping with older guys?
But we don't know the context in which that thing came, because there was the part of that story where she said he was kind of a mentor and she had discussed being sexually harassed with him. There was that too. I mean, you can say anything. Yeah, go ahead. Aren't I being nice today? I keep telling you, go ahead.
She definitely seems to have more of an itch. Look, I think they all have variations in terms of credibility, or even if you believe them, if their claim amounts to much. I don't think the woman at the wedding really,
that was ridiculous. Yeah, right. I mean, absurd.
I don't know.
And asked.
Yeah, it was a little creepy, but it wasn't like, look,
it's a danger. I keep bringing it up because it's a very dangerous thing.
Yeah, if I was a man running for office, I wouldn't I don't know what I would do.
I think if I were a man, I wouldn't run for office.
I'd be very circumspect.
Yeah, I would.
Which I am in general, so it wouldn't be a big change. But
it's weird.
Look, I think people are going to give a 63-year-old asshole guy a little more latitude to be, Yeah.
To be a dirty old man? To be a dirty old man?
To be a little bit of an asshole.
Where's his girlfriend, by the way, of long-standing who lived with him?
I don't know. She's out in California, I think.
Not a word from her, because according to her, this was all being done while she was still there. She only moved out a year ago. Yeah.
Well, it didn't work out with the Kennedys,
Yeah, well, that either. But I don't know. He lives with his daughters in his house. I mean, the whole thing is just smarmy and whatever. But, if we're talking about
I think the main thing is he's not lucky. He's not a nice guy.
But that's got nothing to do with the time of day.
No, of course it doesn't. But I mean, it just shows he's kind of like a jerk to everybody. Yes,
exactly. He's a world-class jerk.
Yeah.
But he must have some charm. He got a Kennedy and he got that other rich lady, so he must have something.
Oh, I think I'm sure he does.
Not my type, but.
Well, maybe in younger days.
Never. Not my type. I bring that up, but let's take it down the road a little bit and take it over to Newsom also in California, where they're trying to impeach him. But, and the Dems are, their own worst enemy in all of these things. And yet here in Florida, which I want to bring up very quickly, there's this, Matt. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. We got a governor who's completely out of control here. Now they've got him on definitely trying to sell get your COVID vaccine, but you pay for it by giving me a donation. It's ugly stuff. Now it turns out that he may have actually had COVID in December and disappeared for 3 months. Nikki Fried, who's his only Democrat in his cabinet, the attorney, she's the ag secretary who's going to run for governor, no question, said, where was he for 3 weeks? Back in December. We need to get better characters in politics than we've got. And in the second half of the show, we actually talk about that a little bit when my guest is Adam Gentleson. And we're talking about something that's very important to our conversation, even today with you and I, and that's the filibuster. Biden's $1.9 trillion rescue plan passes today.
That's a big deal.
That is a huge deal. Oh, my gosh.
That is a big deal. That is more than 3 times the size of what the Obama stimulus was. It's got a lot of comments, and it's a big.
It's a big win, but it's more than a big win. You there?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear any response. It's a big win for a number of reasons, but it's groundbreaking because that whole thing with the child care, which I know has an end to it, except. It's the beginning of a new beginning for parents raising kids who can't afford to raise kids anymore. This is like the kind of thing that Johnson pulled off. Medicare, Medicaid. This is, it's underrated, this child, $300 a month per kid.
Yeah, it's got a lot. It's got a lot of stuff going on. Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's a big win, and it wasn't easy to keep the Democrats together on it. And it's impressive. So on to the next things.
I'm curious as to how the Republicans don't get burned by this ultimately, having voted against a $1,400 stimulus, check, and the $300 and everything else that's in this bill. That America across the board is like 75 or more percent pro. I think it's going to be really interesting because I think it gives the Dems something to play with later.
Well, by 2022, they'll be bitching about Dr. Seuss and everything.
Well, don't get started on that. Republicans are retiring in droves. What's that about? You know what that's about, Matt? It's leaving the crazies to run on the Republican side. That's just scary.
Here comes Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Right.
Clones everywhere.
This is not good.
Not great.
Not great. But what's part of my fascination with the Brits is, and I bring up this word dignity and sophistication. They haven't gone as woke as we are. I don't have a whole lot of patience for this country is going off the rails. I'm sorry, it is. I think the loonies are going to get control for all the good that Biden is doing. I do. And it scares the hell out of me. Biden's big mistake right now. He's walked into a minefield, and that's his thing on the border. They better figure this out and what they're going to do. Because the Republicans are making hay like crazy on this, and this is not a good thing.
Well, sure, they got a lot to work with.
He's got no plan. And Jen Psaki pushed it over to the department and said, "This is not ours. This is theirs." Oy.
Right.
No, that's not a good move. You better come up with something a little bit more.
You want something a little bit more than that.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
the Republicans are flying down to the border, with cameras.
Oh yeah, they're going to be down there a lot.
Oh my God! So yeah, that needs to be fixed. While you weren't looking this week, and we're involved with all of this that we've just been talking about, yesterday, Arkansas governor, Republican lunatic, I hate Clinton, and I'm going to put Clinton in jail if I can. Old man Asa Hutchinson signed an anti-abortion law. Did you read that law?
I can only imagine, but no, I didn't. What is this one?
No abortions for those impregnated in an act of rape or incest. Although I will say he did say that was not the law he wanted to sign. That's a law he had to sign. They did it. They used Hutchinson. This was the Republicans pushing, them to do it in, this state that is as backwards as they come. Because they want to get it to the Supreme Court as quickly as they can. Will the Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade? Everybody says no. I don't know. But this is what we got. State after state, Republican state with these abortion laws. And the reason I bring it up is because there is something interesting that's going on here, which is they can't get Biden. Biden's not Obama. Biden's old, white, and male. Hard to push against him, right?
Right.
Which is fascinating, which is the Dems finally did the right thing in picking him to be their nominee and now president. But the fact of the matter is they can't beat him there. They can't beat him, with the COVID relief package and all this kind of stuff. So they're going to go and they're going to do what they always do, and they're getting into the border war and culture war. And Dems don't do well when you get into the culture war. So there's a huge setup going on here. I hope everybody's aware of how much of a setup this is becoming.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, look, I mean, it's all kind of owning the lib stuff and cultural stuff, and they're gonna, they're just gonna try to make, watch Tucker every night, and you can see the game plan.
I get sick. I can't watch him. I'm sorry.
Open borders. Yeah. Democrats want open borders.
Right, the same old crap.
They want your kids to be transsexual.
It's bizarre. So, well, the Dems play into their hands too, and we're going to talk about that.
And the Dems often play into their hands, right?
It's just crazy. Merrick Garland going to be voted Attorney General. We're hoping maybe in the next 24, 48 hours. I was reading somewhere right before we went to broadcast that maybe they're playing games, the Republicans. But ultimately he'll get there. I know you wanted to talk about what went to Iraq. I just don't have the time. But I do want to talk to you about this before we close. Lindsey Graham called the money for the black farmers in the rescue bill reparations. Can I repeat that?
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham called the money for black farmers in the rescue bill reparations. How low is he going to go? By the same token, you don't have to answer. Republican Senator Tim Scott told Fox News that woke supremacy is as bad as white supremacy. He's black, folks, in case you don't know it.
Right.
Crazy shit going on that.
Yeah, well, they got their people all ginned up about Antifa and reparations and everything. And, as you say, the Dems often play into it.
Biden's approval rating is approximately 9 points higher than the T words. That's what I'm calling him these days. Were at the same time. This is good news.
Yeah. Well, it is breaking his way. The economy's going to come back, and, the vaccines are getting out there. I mean, it would be bad if he wasn't a little more popular at this point.
Who knows? Semi-Democrat. Hear me? Semi-Democrat Joe Manchin. We're going to be talking about this in the next half hour, folks, so stick with us because this is really an extraordinary conversation on this filibuster and the mess we have in the Senate. But we thought over the weekend maybe he gave hope to a compromise on the filibuster, but he dashed those hopes yesterday. Matt, Joe needs to be reined in. I don't know how they rein him in, but they need to rein him in. Can they rein him in?
Yeah. Can they rein him in? Well, they I wouldn't say they reined him in, but he voted for the package. I mean, look, it always looks a little touch and go there, right? I think, they all have to be, look, when it's a 50-50 Senate, everyone's a kingmaker. And, with him, you got to give him what he wants to some degree. And I think Biden's pretty good at nursing that. So, we'll see what happens on the next round.
Before I go to close, anything you wanted to say?
No, just, hey, I think the Pope in Iraq was a big deal, meeting with the big Shia leader. I think that was a big deal.
Yeah, I didn't get excited about that. I guess I'm not excited about the Pope. He seems, right now in these crazy times we're living in, he seems kind of innocuous. Maybe it's just me.
Yeah, well, take comfort in that, right?
Yeah, I guess you could. So I'm going to leave you with this. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of patience for politically incorrect stuff. I just don't.
I hear you. I agree.
That's where I part company with the Democrats. I call them as I see them. But
I know you do. Anti-Trump, anti-woke.
We reached a whole new height on this politically incorrect the other day when Dove Soap announced it's taking the word normal off its products, Matt. It's taking the word normal off its products. I'm not allowed to have normal
you can
skin.
Get greasy hair, dry hair, and normal, right? Like that's how it is now.
Oh, when does it stop? When does it stop?
Did they come up with a new word?
No, they're just going to take it off. They're just going to take it off. This is what I wondered what Dr. Seuss would have done with that. Let's leave it there. Former Deputy Chief of Staff to Senator Harry Reid, Adam Gentleson is the Public Affairs Director at Democracy Forward, a columnist for GQ, and frequent commentator for CNN, The New York Times, and elsewhere. In Kill Switch, The Rise of the Modern Senate and the Crippling of American Democracy, Jentleson combines his behind-the-scenes experience with historical research to map out the Senate's decline from a great deliberative body to the nexus of partisan gridlock. Today, with the help of Mr. Jentleson, we take a look at the filibuster, its history, its effect on the decline of the Senate, its effect on Americans' lives, minority rule, and what needs to change to return the American government to the vision of our founding fathers. Let's talk with Adam Gentleson. Okay, so there is a lot to talk about here. A lot to talk about here. And this book couldn't have come to me at a better time, I have to tell you, because the number one question I'm getting from people is, what's the story with this filibuster thing? I mean, average America probably, thinks they know, but they don't know. So this book, Kill Switch, as you say in the book, every major decision governing our diverse majority female and increasingly liberal country bears the stamp of the United States Senate, an institution controlled by people who are almost exclusively white, overwhelmingly male, disproportionately conservative, and they don't represent majority of Americans these days, and certainly not in the foreseeable future. Talk to me about this. Tell me, once known as the world's greatest deliberative body, the Senate has become, I think, one of the greatest threats to our democracy. I think you share that point of view. How did that happen, Adam? How did that happen?
Well, it's because the filibuster has changed over time. And I think that, it was never, you could argue, a real force for good. It was sort of, was not part of the framers' original vision for the Senate. They did not want something this powerful to exist as a tool of obstruction. They thought the Senate should be a place where there was real deliberation and real thoughtful debate and discussion. But at the end of the day, when the Senate decided to move forward, it should do so on the basis of whether a majority supported whatever bill was at hand. The filibuster emerged in the 19th century after all the framers had passed away, primarily to advance and protect the interests of the slaveholding class, because America was trending towards abolition. And they knew that if the majority could have its way, they were going to abolish slavery. So they created the filibuster in part to expand the power of the minority to protect slavery. But even through the 19th century, all you could do was talk. And that's where I think this idea of the talking filibuster comes from. It's the Jimmy Stewart model of standing on the floor of the Senate giving a speech. But over the course of the 20th century, it began to acquire this supermajority threshold, which is the ability to raise the number of votes it takes from simple majority where it was for most of the Senate's existence up to what we have as 60 votes today. And that's where the real problem comes from, because, it's one thing to talk and delay, but eventually you have to stop talking. You've either persuaded people or you haven't, but you've had your say and the world moves on. The ability to increase the number of votes it takes to pass something is much more powerful because it can actually stop things from passing, especially in our polarized environment today where getting 60 votes for anything is pretty much impossible. So that's the source of gridlock today. It's a problem because the filibuster is more powerful, and it's a problem because it's diverged from what people think of. It's not debate. It's just increasing the number of votes it takes to pass something, which is killing a lot of very common sense, pragmatic bills today.
Debate takes two. Can we start there?
Yeah.
Right? There is no debate.
That's right.
It's I'll speak, you speak, end of conversation. That's very scary. But I want to go back to its roots because particularly right now, where a lot of people are calling the Republican Party the white supremacist party. It starts with white supremacy. You brought up, slavery and all of that. Just, has it changed at all in that sense? Or are we really talking about today, and we can frame it within the context of the Republican Party as it is today? And should I bring up the T word? Because it's changed since then. But is it white supremacy we're talking about? Is that basically what these mostly male, with the help of one or two Republican female, up to? Everything goes back to that, who they're going to put on the courts.
Right. Well, the filibuster, it used to be much more overt. I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, the leading champion of the filibuster throughout most of the 20th century was a man named Richard Russell of Georgia, and he proclaimed in his own words that his primary mission in public service was the preservation of white supremacy. He made no bones about that. He said any Southern man worth a pinch of salt would give his all to preserve white supremacy. And he saw the filibuster as a key tool for preserving that, because fundamentally the filibuster is about preserving the status quo. It makes it easier to block any sort of change. And, one of the main strains of change throughout the 20th century was the expansion of civil rights and the expansion of the franchise and voting rights. So that was what Richard Russell was using the filibuster to block, and many other white supremacists, self-avowed white supremacists too. I don't think I would say today that it's, exclusively white supremacy. I think that, however, it is about preserving power where power lies. It is ironic because the filibuster is defended in terms of protecting minority rights, but the minority that's being protected with the filibuster tends to be a very powerful minority. You're talking about minority in the sense of the 1%, not in the sense of a vulnerable population in need of protection. So it continues to be a tool that preserves the power of the status quo, and even though it has its roots directly in the overt, explicit preservation of white supremacy, as the people who were using it at the time stated very clearly.
I'm going to also say male dominance.
Absolutely.
Not something people want to talk about.
Basically, look, the way to look at it is, if you like who is in power now, and I'm not just talking about the administration, that comes and goes, but if you look at the overall power structure of the country, and, it is mostly white men in power, if you like that, then the filibuster helps preserve that structure. If you want change, then you should oppose or support efforts to reform the filibuster, because the filibuster just makes change virtually impossible on a meaningful level in our country today.
Did the framers set the system up so there would be little change?
Yeah, and that's the thing is, look, you can't let the framers off the hook here, and this is a challenge for me writing the book because I'm not an originalist. I don't think that they, were clairvoyant, or that we should go by their exact words and everything they said. But they designed a system that was supposed to be able to change, and they did that consciously. They wanted the system to be able to evolve and adapt, and they very consciously didn't do certain things that would have made it harder to change. They were very aware of the idea of supermajority thresholds at the time, of the idea of taking more than a majority to pass things. The reason they were aware of this was that the Articles of Confederation, the first draft of American government, had a supermajority threshold in its Congress. And they saw how this made it virtually impossible to pass anything at all. And so when they designed the Constitution and our current form of government, they said we should not have supermajority thresholds. We should reserve them for an extraordinary small set of things like removal from office, constitutional amendments, and those sorts of things. But everything else, they were very clear, should have a lower threshold, should be a simple majority. And so they very consciously designed a system that was going to be able to change. They had checks and balances. They had, a bicameral legislature. You had a House and a Senate. You had a judiciary, and you had a presidency, all of which were supposed to check each other and make sure the change that happened wasn't rash, or or precipitous, but they did want the system to be able to change. They were very clear about that. If you were able to get a bill through the House, through the Senate, and get it signed by the president and upheld by the judiciary, they thought that should pass and become law. So they wanted change to be challenging, but not impossible. What we have now with the filibuster is a system that makes change impossible, and they would oppose that.
Why did you write this book now?
Well, I started writing it a couple years ago, basically when I left the Senate, and I wrote it because the Senate, basically to fill the gap between the Senate that I expected to encounter and the Senate that I did encounter. A sort of turning point for me was in 2013. In the spring of that year, we brought a bill to the floor to create a universal system of background checks for gun purchases. This was a response to the murder the prior December of 20 first graders at Newtown, Connecticut. And, responding to that awful event with something as common sense as universal background checks seemed like a no-brainer. And it certainly seemed that way to the American public. 88% of the American people supported the bill. The bill that came forward was a bipartisan proposal sponsored by Joe Manchin of West Virginia, a Democrat, and Pat Toomey, a Republican in Pennsylvania. They got 55 senators in support, a bipartisan group. We even had gun rights groups in favor of this bill because it was so common sense. But it failed because it could get to 55, it couldn't get to 60. And there was no debate. There was no Jimmy Stewart moment. There was nobody on the floor debating it. They didn't have to because all they could do was simply raise the threshold of how many votes it took to pass this. And that to me was a turning point because that was wrong. That shouldn't have happened that way. You are told that the Senate is supposed to be a cooling saucer, that there's some wisdom when it forces delay on an issue, but there was no wisdom here. This was simply not how our government was supposed to work. And I think it was that moment that started me down the path of asking the questions that eventually led to this book.
You worked for Harry Reid, and that's what and he voted, Democrats voted for the nuclear option in 2013. That nuclear option, a term that we're going to hear a lot about, I'm sure, in the next few weeks and months. And he eliminated the filibuster for the executive branch and judicial nominees. Where'd that get us?
Well, I actually think that we gained a lot from that. I think two things about it. I think that by going nuclear at the time that we did, we were able to confirm a wave of Obama justices to district courts and circuit courts. And if we hadn't gone nuclear, President Obama would have had the fewest judicial nominees confirmed of any president since Ronald Reagan. So by making that change, we're able to get him on par with all recent presidents by the time that he left office. So there are many more Obama justices serving lifetime appointments on the federal bench today because we did that change than there would have been otherwise. I also am of the view that if we had not made this change, then Mitch McConnell would have done it himself the first time he faced a filibuster from Democrats against his judicial nominees. We all know now that judicial nominees were his top priority. Getting them confirmed was the thing he's most proud of and the thing he was most dead set on as majority leader. And I don't think he would have let a Democratic filibuster stand in the way of that goal. So if we hadn't gotten rid of it, we would have gotten fewer Obama justices confirmed. McConnell would have taken office and then immediately gotten rid of it himself. He would have had more vacancies to fill, and he would have done exactly the same thing he did now, confirmed all the justices that he went on to confirm, except he would have gotten even more confirmed because we would have left him more open spots. So, I think what we're seeing in the Senate and politics in general is an era of sort of realigning our rules and trying to find a new normal. And I think that for progressives and for Democrats, following this process through and getting to a point where, the biggest tool in our toolbox is passing legislation. We are the party of change. We are the ones who want to see change. We are not the party that wants to preserve the status quo. So by making it harder to pass legislation, we are inherently making it harder for us to do the thing that is most important to us and without which we can't accomplish our agenda. Republicans can accomplish their agenda by stacking the judiciary, by letting the judiciary strike down things they don't like, rolling back regulations, rolling back rights, and then occasionally getting their tax cuts, a few other items through end runs around the filibuster. But the filibuster prevents progressives from passing all of the things that we care about, solutions to climate change, income inequality, voting rights. None of those things can pass as long as the filibuster is in place. And so while, Republicans will get something out of it too down the road, probably, progressives will come out way ahead on net because, we're the party of change, and making change easier benefits the party of change.
And our dear Joe Biden doesn't agree with you.
Well, he said most recently, he said his preference was not to make changes to the filibuster rule. I thought the use of the word preference seemed rather pointed to me. I think that what President Biden would clearly prefer would be for there to be a flourishing of bipartisanship and for Republicans to come over and work with him on his priorities. But he's already demonstrated with the COVID aid package that if Republicans aren't going to come along or demand unreasonable concessions, that he's willing to go forward with just Democratic votes. He used a process called reconciliation for COVID aid, so it was allowed to pass on a majority. Most policies are not able to use that process for very complicated reasons, but for the purposes of this discussion, just know that most things can't pass through that process. So he's going to face a question of, if Republicans don't come along, does he just give up on the things that he cares about? Or is he going to start engaging on the conversation about what types of reforms need to happen? And I can't speak for him, but
you think he'll bend? Yeah.
I think he'll just start engaging in that conversation because I think Republicans will force him there.
And Joe Manchin will hold him back. We can talk about that in a second. I just want to, I want to go back to something, and with these things with the justices and what happened with Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett. Turnaround is fair play, and that's where we're at right now. We're at one side does one thing, and the next time the other side gets in power, then they go and they. And this is part of the stuck. And I wanted to talk to you about that because it's driving. We're like in a yin and yang government right now. And everything we're doing is lateral. It's a back and forth. It's not an up. It's really hard to get to the up, to take the people up. It's just lateral. Mm-hmm. And I think your book is so powerful because it really gives a reason why you got to end this.
Right.
Thing, or this is where we're going to be stuck. It's not we the people anymore. It's we the whims of mostly the boys.
Yeah,
running the show. I don't know why this is so hard. That's the thing. But Democrats, the backbone thing there. They need to drink calcium by the volumes. That's just something that I wanted to bring up and say to you. Mitch McConnell, the most dangerous man in government right now in the Senate?
I happen to believe he is because he is so effective. I mean, there's certainly people who are farther to the right and more extreme and, seem to have sympathies with sort of soft authoritarian tendencies like Josh Hawley. But McConnell is just ruthlessly effective, and that is, I think, what makes him dangerous. So I think that, and I don't mean dangerous in a violent way. I just mean dangerous to values and progress. But yes, I mean, I think that but part of what makes him powerful, I mean, he's playing on a playing field that is tilted heavily in his direction. It's easier for Republicans to win elections because of voter suppression and, the structural biases of our system, like the Electoral College, that means they don't have to win a majority to win the White House, and it's easier for Republicans to achieve their agenda in the Senate because they have tools that allow them to wield obstruction very easily, like the filibuster. And so part of this to me is about defanging McConnell and forcing him, taking away a lot of his power and these structures that artificially inflate how much power he has. I mean, the COVID bill was interesting because he just sort of was a non-entity on it. Democrats passed it and McConnell just sort of stood on the sidelines. He wasn't able to block it like he would have been if, on other bills that can't go through that process where he can use the filibuster. So if you look at the COVID bill and how that worked, imagine that on other issues where we don't have to negotiate with him if we don't want to. If he wants to be reasonable, then he's welcome to come negotiate. But if he doesn't do that, which he probably won't, Democrats can do it themselves. I think they should always have an open hand to Republicans if they want to join in the process, but they shouldn't allow Republicans to block them if they're just out to, obstruct, manufacture gridlock and gain power, which is McConnell's playbook.
You brought this up too, kind of peripherally, but there it is. Built in the Constitution with the Senate, 2 from each state, regardless of what, Wyoming versus New York. That's insane right there. Right. We don't even want to get into gerrymandering or voter suppression because those are also issues, because I don't want everybody to think that this is the only thing, but this is major. And unless this is fixed, so much for getting the White House. It doesn't make any difference unless you fix this particular problem. This thing about the talking filibuster, it's coming up again, where everybody's looking for their Frank Capra moment.
Yeah.
You're right. I want to be Jimmy Stewart. Yeah. Please, please, please. But that's a bunch of malarkey too. Because it's just go ahead. I'll give it to you. Go.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right, because, I mean, look, there's, the portrayal was accurate in some ways, but, there's sort of a power dynamic that was a little bit inaccurate, which is that, in the movie, and I think and now in popular imagination, Jimmy Stewart was, the little guy standing up to powerful interests using the filibuster. And normally, the way the filibuster happens is it's powerful interests
right
using the filibuster to block the interests of the little guy. So there's, the way it's been absorbed in popular imagination is inaccurate, because it's portrayed as the tool of the underdog when really it's the tool of the overdog. And ironically, Mr. Smith is based on a true story, a senator named Burton Wheeler from Montana who actually did uncover corruption in the Pacific Northwest, but the filibuster had nothing to do with it in real life. He did it through investigations and congressional hearings. But Frank Capra needed something more dramatic, so he injected the filibuster into it. So there's that inaccuracy. But to the extent that it sort of is, sort of an American value to let people have their say and stand up, and the Senate was supposed to preserve that, there's nothing wrong in my view with allowing senators to speak at great length and giving them a chance to persuade the other side to come around. And in fact, I think that there's value. One of the reasons the filibuster was not used as often in the past, when you actually had to go to the floor and talk, is that if you were taking a stance that was opposed by the vast majority of the country, you didn't necessarily want to come out and put on a show about it. If you were, for instance, with the background checks bill, if you were opposing a policy supported by 88% of the American people, you didn't necessarily want to be, featured on the evening news giving a long speech about it. And that's accountability. People are entitled to have whatever views they have. But the ability to block it without explaining yourself gets you away from that accountability. So I think there's value in returning it to that. The key is just to make sure that at the end of that process, after the minorities have their say, the majority is allowed to move forward in some reasonably timely fashion, not like a day or two, but some reasonably timely fashion.
Which brings me to 2 points. Number one, I don't think a lot of these people who are in the Senate these days know how to talk like that. Because I think that a lot of the problem we're having, in my opinion, is the voters are incredibly ill-informed or uninformed and are picking people to send up there to represent them who are idiots. My words, not yours. So, I'm a straight shooter. I'm just going to tell you what I think. I'm not in government. The other one is, it's interesting on the rescue bill. The public was with the Democrats. All those people who voted for Trump were with the Democrats. I mean, they were putting themselves as Republicans in just an awful situation coming down the pike when you say, well, I voted against you getting another $1,400. Huh? What? So there's that dynamic that's in there right now that I think is going to come into play more than it has been over the last 5 years. There are things that people really do want, even if they voted for Trump. When given the ability to have it, maybe a bridge that they can go across and not worry about falling off. I think that is changing somewhat now. So I'm going to be curious to see, how this all progresses in the next few months, because whatever changes are going to happen, they're going to have to happen pretty quickly. So which gets me to, I say to you, what next? What's the solution? What's the compromise? What do you see coming down the pike?
Well, I think reform is going to happen in some form or fashion, because I don't think there's going to be a flourishing of bipartisanship. And I do think that, Biden and Democrats in general are quickly going to be faced with a choice of, either giving up on a lot of their agenda and specifically on things like voting rights, or enacting some kind of a reform. So I think circumstances will sort of force this to a head. Then the question of, what does that reform look like? I think that's probably going to be a gradual process. I think that this is sort of how it's worked in the past, is you've often had to, do this in an iterative fashion where you try some reforms, you see if it works, and you adjust it as you go forward. But probably the most likely outcome, in my view, is a sort of restoration of the talking filibuster, where it's like a use it or lose it standard. If you want to hold up a bill, fine, go for it. Have a speech, have your say, but eventually, maybe gradually, the majority has the ability to cut that off and move forward itself. So I think that would be an ideal outcome in my view, and I think that is a realistic prospect.
Two things come to mind here. One is that there is a new kind of bipartisanship. It may not be among the senators, as we're talking about the Senate, but it may be the voters, which is what I was referring to before, in terms of them being with the Dems, the MAGAs, on the rescue package. The other one is will it hurt Biden's brand for him to go full steam ahead and say, I'm going to do what I have to do to get the legislation passed?
I don't think it will, because I think that Biden has the credibility with the American people, specifically on this issue, to tell them that he tried everything and Republicans left him no choice. You know, he is widely known as a Senate guy. He's widely known as someone who loves the Senate, believes in the institution, and wouldn't do anything to hurt it. And I think that, the American people look at Washington and they see gridlock, so they don't have to be convinced that Washington is broken. And I think if Biden comes to them and says that, he has come to the conclusion that this is the way to fix it, I think they'll believe him. I think he's got credibility on this, and I think that will really matter when this comes down to it.
I'll leave you the last thing to say. Anything you want to say? Or have you said it all?
I think, no, I mean, it's just been great talking to you. And I think this is an issue where, people's voices really matter. And so, calling your senators, letting them know that you care about filibuster reform, that you want to see results over gridlock. This is an issue where people's voices really matter. So I just would encourage folks, if they are persuaded by this and they care about this, to make their voices heard.
I will take the last word, because I will say I do think that we are at a surprisingly, I don't know that anybody thought it was going to come just as it has, but I think we're at a very powerful moment right now. And I wouldn't have said that 3 months ago. So there you go. Change can happen. Thank you, Adam.
Sure can. Thank you, Hallie. It's great to be here.
I've been speaking with Adam Jenelson. His book, a must-read, is Kill Switch, The Rise of the Modern Senate and the Crippling of American Democracy. Visit Adam on Twitter at @AJenelson. Find his book at Amazon.com. Thank you for tuning in to the Hallie Casser-Jayne Show, a production of Resec LLC. The Hallie Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, and is available at HallieCasserJayne.com and on all your favorite apps. Be sure to visit us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and follow me on Twitter at The Hallie CJ Show. Until next time, this is Hallie Casser-Jayne.